Guru Nation, thank you so much for tuning in and watching, listening, however you are consuming. Thank you. I've got a very special guest, Dr. Kirsch, on. He wrote this book called The Drug Hunters. I have it on my Kindle here. Amazing story. If you work in this space, especially clinical research, you need to read it. It's not I think it's required reading because it's going to make you appreciate what we do. Uh, a lot of times, Dr. Kirsch, us people working in clinical research, whether we're coordinators, whether we're CRAs, project managers, we lose sight of the science because we're just in it for the clinical outcomes. Hey, let's make sure we report the adverse events. Let's make sure we follow the protocol. It's very easy to do clinical trials. Matter of fact, most of my career without giving any thought to the science behind it. And I stopped doing that a few years ago. I think around COVID, I started getting more interested in actual science behind these IP. And now, one of the things I do with my PI at my site is we're pretty selective about what studies we bring on. One of the first things we look at now is what's the mechanism of action of this drug? Is it something potentially beneficial to our patients? Doesn't matter what the IRB says. If you don't believe in the drug, what's the point of doing it? So I'm not going to try to convince a patient to do a study that I wouldn't put myself in if I had to. And I think a lot more research sites and professionals need to start adopting this mindset. But thank you so much for coming on. What do you think about this? Because you've been in this space for a long time as well.
Oh yeah, no. I was between biotech and big pharma, always very early drug discovery. Oh, let's call it 35 years plus or minus. Okay, always been in early drug discovery. So especially in big pharma, not so much in biotech. You come up with your clinical candidate drug, and then you throw it over the wall into a clinical. You keep your fingers crossed. But that's a black box for us.
So, and then what do you think about the new trends? I don't know when it became a thing. You've worked for big pharma, but maybe recently, maybe as early as a decade and a half ago, I think it was Pfizer, a spokesman from Pfizer or somebody. Maybe I read it in your book actually. They said, "We're not even looking, we're not even developing drugs anymore. We're just acquiring IP at this point." Was that from your
Yeah.
book that I got?
Um, Could be. I agree with that. Probably might have been in the book. But that I started with. Um, Actually, I don't know if maybe I'm a jinx. Every company I work for no longer exists as an independent entity. But I started working for Squibb, and that was a time when big pharma basically was fully integrated, and you had groups that were trying to discover new drugs, new mechanisms of action, et cetera, and all the way through to clinical approval and marketing and sales and manufacturing and everything. And I've seen um, so a flight from early drug discovery in lots of sectors. It's too risky. It's too expensive, and companies would rather let somebody else take the risk. And then, if you're lucky enough to get to the point of having a clinical candidate, you're probably pretty desperate for money. So I can acquire your drug for a good price. You've de-risked it significantly, and now. And so basically, to me, the sweet spot seems to be a good phase two. If you have a good phase two, then people are interested. Anything less than that, not so much.
A good phase two. So that's enough to feed the biotech frenzy that goes on right now. We're in the middle of a biotech bear market, but what do you think is the current state of biotech, Dr. Kirsch?
Um, the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years of my career, I was a small, pretty raw startup in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I don't know, um, a, shall we say, a difficult relationship between the science people and the money people, you know, and I'd like to think the money people need the science people to have something to invest in, but the science people definitely need the money people, and they come at it from very, very different perspectives, different goals. So I like to tell this fictional story of two companies, new biotech and new pharma. Okay, and new biotech, their people discover a clinical candidate drug, and they take it to another entity to be developed. And it turns out that it's FDA approved, but in the long run, it's a small market. Um, uh, Not a lot of adoption by patients. Not a lot of adoption. It's not supported by insurance money, and the whole thing is a financial bust. In the other company, the people have a clinical candidate. They sell it to another entity, and it never achieves uh, um, uh, um, uh, clinical significance. It's never FDA approved. So let's look at the scientists and the business people from the two entities. So the science people whose drug was FDA approved, never made any money, they're successful. I helped. I found the drug safe, efficacious, helps people with the disease. The business people, of course, are very sad. In the other entity, where they sell off their agent at a good profit at an early stage to another entity, they're very happy. They made money with it. The business people are very happy, but the scientists are very sad because it was never FDA approved and didn't help patients. Wow. It's shocking that these people can work together at all.
So what keeps them working together? I mean, it's the seems like the crossroads of passion and financial incentives. It seems to be healthy for this. Do you think the process can be improved at all?
Well, first of all, I think the two groups need one another,
Mhm.
right? I mean, the investors have to have some end vehicle to invest in, and God knows the scientists need money to support their work. I don't know, if I could figure out a way to make it better, I probably wouldn't be on this podcast. I'd be making it better. I don't know.
Well, you're making it better because you are an advisor as well and a consultant.
Mhm.
Um, and I do want to get into the in and outs of your career because, like you mentioned, Bristol Myers was one of the companies that you worked for. Uh, just to zoom out, drug discovery, like modern day drug discovery, with what we know as pharmaceutical companies, really only been around for like a century, plus or minus, what, like 30 years?
Yeah, let's call it a century and a quarter.
Century and
Okay.
a quarter. So look how far we've come, right? We're already at CRISPR gene editing. What do you think the next century holds?
So it's hard to say, and maybe I'm an old guy and I don't have the faith in the future that I should, looking backwards more than looking forward. But I think it's totally unpredictable. I remember a time, and I got caught up in it in the 90s with the human genome.
Mm,
Oh, we were going to grab the human genome by the tail and shake it a little bit, and drugs were going to come flying out.
mm,
Well, and I ran a functional genomics group at that time. Uh, um, didn't work out
yeah.
as we expected. I don't know. I don't know what else. Frankly, looking at the other side, I remember when I started my career, there were a lot of people who were very negative about proteinaceous therapeutics. Oh, patients are not going to adopt them. They require an injection. People want to take a pill. They don't want to take it. And yet now, the majority of FDA-approved drugs are parenteral agents. I think one of the things we didn't realize because we didn't have the knowledge is how long-lived antibodies are.
Mhm.
So everyone's thinking insulin, oh, I've got to take this 4 times a day. No, no, antibody drug, take that once every couple of weeks. Much easier for compliance. And that's turned out to be a big, deal. As I said, more than half of the drugs are some kind
Right,
of antibody.
right. Same thing in your book, you mentioned bacterial resistance, and there's no incentive now to research. It's actually scary when I read it. We haven't researched new antibiotics in decades. There's no
Yes.
incentive, right? Can you kind of unpack that? Why? Why that is?
Yeah, so I think what it's going to take is some very famous, important person, either someone deep in their lives or they themselves are going to have to die, unfortunately, from an infection that 50 years ago was easy to treat. And if that happens, then there's going to be a big brouhaha and a big upheaval. And people say, oh, these bacterial infections, they're important, and we're going to have to do something about it. Beyond that, at this point, think about all of the economic disadvantages. Let's say you and I get together, we're both a couple of smart guys, and we say, oh, we're going to start a company and we're going to come up with a new antibiotic. And we come with this wonderful new antibiotic. So every single hospital is going to say, well, we're going to put this on reserve formulary. We're going to reserve this for the very sickest patients who might be needing something that can overcome resistant microorganisms. So what are my sales going to look like? Awful,
Mm,
awful. Okay. Back in the day, when penicillin was discovered and tetracycline, erythromycin, et cetera, they were drugs that were being given out by, primary care physicians. You'd come in and say, "Hey, doc, I've got a cough here. So let me put you on some penicillin." Okay.
right.
Tremendous sales, uh, tremendous, profits, and of course, leading to tremendous resistance. I don't know.
But it doesn't make sense to me because if the bacteria are mutating to evolve to become resistant, right? Isn't that almost like a predictable revenue stream? It can't be that difficult to follow the bacteria, how they're mutating and adapting, and then
Well,
coming
but
up
but
with a
but
new drug.
yeah, but that drug is going to be short-lived
Mm,
if you put it into full use, because then I had a business person come to me years ago, and he said, "Don," he said, "you scientists don't get it. What you need to do is you need to find an antibiotic to which resistance can't develop.
mm,
And once
that's
you do that,
possible.
then okay." So I said, "Wow." I said, "It's a good thing you business people are smarter than us scientists, because I would have said that's impossible." Of course, it is impossible. You just said.
Um, do you do you actually think that the incentives can be just like we came up with Operation Warp Speed, right? You're saying it's
Hmm.
going to take something of that magnitude, regulatory intervention or government incentives maybe to expedite this.
Yeah, that's a possibility where you know, it's a payer issue. I say it's so important for society to have these new antibiotics on reserve formulary with very short sales that I'm willing to pay, $10,000 a dose to protect society globally.
But if you think
And
about how much amoxicillin and doxycycline are being prescribed, and yeah, like I mean, those are all generic. There's no money
yes,
there anymore. But just the sheer volume of
yes,
those prescriptions, wouldn't it make sense for like a next gen, even if it's only going to be for 7 years, short lived, right? But the patent protection's only short, anyways, no?
yeah. So you get patent protection for the way I look at it. You have to file patents sort of mid to late discovery phase when you have your clinical candidate. And then you know better than me how long it takes to go through clinical. So you probably get 10 years of protection.
Yeah.
Okay. So of patent protection out of the 20. So I don't know. I mean,
Mm.
um,
It's
but
just
if
something
you're
that scared
but
the
if you're a
hell out of me.
clinician, if you're a clinician and you know that you have this antibiotic and it's great and there's nothing resistant to it, um, are you going to want to start prescribing it knowing that you're going to start developing resistance? Or are you going to say, I'm going to try to manage resistance here? I've got my patients, I've got epidemiology in mind,
Mhm.
and I'm going to be careful not to prescribe it too much, or else resistance is going to develop, and then I'm going to be back to ground zero.
It seems like it's just musical chairs, right? As long as this works, we're gonna keep doing it, and
Hmm.
then when it doesn't, then we figure something else out.
Hmm.
It's scary. That was, like, probably so far, I'm only halfway through with the book. Everybody go get the book, it's in the show notes underneath. You're in your role as a group leader at BMS, as a director at Wyeth, you've worked with a lot of the big pharma. I think you mentioned in the book, part of the hypertension. You were involved with some
Well, I knew that
regards, right?
I'd love to say that that was my project, but they were colleagues of mine who came
Colleagues.
up with Captain Proof. Okay, but
Fair
I
enough.
used to have lunch. I used to have. I guess my biggest credit is I used to have lunch with them
But
in the cafeteria.
you were still in that culture, like, they're your
Right.
colleagues, that you could share the enthusiasm and the struggles. Um, the research site has also evolved since then, right? It used to be very heavily skewed academic medical centers, where
Mhm.
their tech transfer offices have other motives for taking on studies. Really, it was Dennis Gillings with Quintiles, now it's IQVIA, that came up with this CRO idea. And that really decentralized, in a way, research. And that's why I have a job today. That's why I have a business, because of him. Like, we owe a lot of thanks to him, regardless of how you feel about CROs. I have plenty of opinions about them, but you were in the middle of this whole switch to CROs. What was your thoughts going into that period of time, and how do you think we've fared so far? It's about 40 years now of maybe CROs being
Well,
around.
I think CROs are a great idea. When I was in biotech, I had a lot of studies that I had done for me at CROs from a big pharma perspective. So I have a big discovery group and I have a big development. Now, what if the discovery group goes through a dry spell?
Mm,
So the development group has nothing to do.
mm.
Okay.
It's a
So
problem.
isn't it a better idea to have a small development group? And then if by some magical luck my discovery group comes up with a bunch of drugs, well, I can always develop them through CROs. Gives me flexibility.
Right. And
I
so
think that's what makes your job. You know,
so you
you don't
think
have to be
they
fully integrated.
yeah, I think it's amazing unlock, at least on paper. I mean, now there's a lot of inefficiencies there. The CROs have become so big.
Mhm.
They're bigger than most of the biotechs that they contract for. I mean, they give their best team to the big pharma, because they know that they're going to be around. And I think they call them RFP, not RFP, but they have a certain model, like a certain pricing tier
Mhm.
for Eli Lilly, Pfizer, all the big ones, and then they have everything else for the biotech, the long tail of the biotechs.
Yeah, so when I was working with CROs, it was mainly in this biotech, and so these would be 10 people operations, little tiny operations.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll tell you a fun, which I think is a funny story. The very early days of the CROs was when the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, had collapsed, and there were a lot of state labs in the former Soviet Union that were trying to adopt a capitalist model, and a lot of them were trying to become CROs. So we had a product that we were putting into a clinical transition. And one of the things you have to do in clinical transition is you have to come up with with a small molecule, a chemical synthesis path that you're going to use for the clinical trials. And then once it's approved, you have to use that same chemical synthesis path forever because that's the approved synthesis path. So we were interviewing CROs to come up with a manufacturing process for us that we would then hire them to do the process, and then we would make that part of our IND package. So one of them was a Russian company, and they came in and they gave us a proposal. And I'm not a chemist, so I'm there because I'm part of the team, but I'm you know kind of half asleep. And all of a sudden, um, one of our scientists, one of our chemists, says, "Wait a minute! In the synthesis that you're proposing, one of the intermediates is trinitrotoluene. That's TNT. You can't do that." And so the guy from the Soviet Union, from the Russian company, says, "No." He says, "We are former Soviet weapons lab. We can handle this safely."
That's incredible. So you
Needless to say, they didn't get. I mean, there's no way the FDA was going to approve a process where one of the major intermediates is TNT.
imagine with all the well, I don't want to get banned from YouTube again, but with the forget it. The pandemic, let's put it this way. The pandemic 100 years from now when they write the books, right? This I think are going to be a pivotal time in our industry. There's so much going on, not just the science itself, not just the possibility of more pandemics, antibiotic resistance. I mean, these things are, especially the antibiotic resistance, people are not thinking enough about this. I don't think. AI, decentralization of sites. I actually think the biotechs and the pharma, with everything being uh, electronic now at the site level, electronic source, electronic regulatory, digitization of the clinops, they could actually, the pharma and the sponsors, the biotech, all of them, they could be more involved in their studies now and not and still develop like small divisions for the science. They can do both. And I think the CROs are panicking because they're starting to acquire sites. Now they're becoming site networks. So they're evolving. But 100 years from now, when they look back at this pandemic, what do you think they're going to say about it itself, the response, the technology that potentially could come out of it? There's a lot of like unknowns still 3 years later, almost 4 years later.
Yeah. Well, so for me, and this is a personal hobby horse of mine, something that really upsets me is what happened was, I think it became politics versus science. And so, and as a scientist, I think people don't appreciate that science isn't always correct. It's just the best answer we have at the moment.
Right.
And later on, we may have a different answer and a better answer. But this is the best answer we have at the moment, and it's going to be a better answer than some repost you see on Facebook, because it was actually generated scientifically. Um, and unfortunately, that and also, why do you take a vaccine? Why would you take a vaccine? Well, you take a vaccine to protect yourself, but you also take a vaccine to protect everyone else, because this staunches the spread of the disease. Okay, fewer people can get it, so it can't spread as much. And I see a lot of selfishness. Oh, I don't want to take the risk of taking the vaccine. I'm probably not going to have a severe case. I'm more risk. I'm an old man, but I'm a 30-year-old guy. I'm not going to have a serious case. I don't want to take the vaccine. Okay, well, probably from your own personal perspective, that's not a bad idea, because you're probably not going to get a serious case. And but what about your societal responsibility? You know, so what if you end up killing grandma? Does
Yeah.
that make you feel bad?
Right. And I think there's two arguments. There's one that what you just laid out. There's certainly a lot of people that are selfish. At least that's for sure. Just spend some time on Twitter, you'll see. Uh, but there's also another group that says, well, I'm not sure if we trust the science yet because they've made a
Mhm.
lot of mistakes. These are the same industry that said hypertension was a normal part of aging. It's in your book. Uh,
Yeah.
and plenty other examples like that. Like it's it's too early for me to decide. I know it's like a
Mhm.
emergency. So it was like a tough line in the sand that I still don't know the correct response. I don't think anyone really does.
Yeah. No, no. So, I mean, science is never perfect, and I'm sorry that people have somehow gotten the impression that it's perfect. It's not. We make plenty of mistakes too, but however, they're unintentional mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
and we're just doing the best we can. I mean, they call this Operation Warp Speed to come up with a vaccine, which I think was a fabulous job.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and to go from zero, here's a new disease we know there's nothing about it, zero about it, to being to a point where we effectively can treat it and we can effectively manage the epidemic. Um, in just a few years.
Mm,
Um, but mistakes were made,
yeah.
So if you in your line of work, whatever that is, say you're an investor, okay, do you mean to tell me every investment you made was profitable, even though you're a rich person? No. Okay, you made mistakes, but you did the best you could with the information you had, and you learned lessons as you went along. That's where we are.
Yeah, yeah. But in that analogy, it would be your biggest investment by far. That that would be the analogy in that case. But it one thing for sure, COVID catalyzed this industry. Like research has never been busier. Our industry has never been busier. The long tail of drugs. Now you've got AI coming out, and you've got potential for a 10x growth really in our space, and we have a staffing shortage. Other industries have layoffs, we have shortage. There are some of the pharma are cutting, but it's not core positions. Like these are a lot of them are outsourced to overseas. But the core position like CRC, CRA, principal investigator, there's a shortage, and there's a shortage of patients, study volunteers.
So here's another thing in terms of public policy. What percent of your operation is foreign trained? Your workers.
Mm. Mine, not so many, but they're all locally grown and produced. But the industry itself, yes, a lot of especially from India, from Nigeria, from Asia. You have a lot of foreign trained physicians, pharmacists move here and become CRAs, project managers, study directors, and you name it, medical monitors. Yeah, a huge part of the industry.
And in discovery too. I teach a course at Columbia in their biotechnology master's program. I say 70-80% of my students are either Indian or Chinese.
Yeah, and
Okay,
that's we
and
need
that's
that.
great because we need the workers,
Yes, we
right?
need the
We
workers.
have a workforce shortage. I'm
Hmm.
training. I hopefully I'm training people who will come into the industry and fulfill that work that shortage.
Worker shortage. The immigrants are a huge part of this industry. Uh, and quite honestly, I had this question actually yesterday from someone because I interviewed someone from India who immigrated to New York City, became a receptionist at a research clinic, worked her way up to now she's a clinical trial manager for a biotech. In about 15 years, she went from receptionist to clinical trial manager. That's the potential. And by the way, she's just getting started. She's like in her early 40s, like just getting started. And she can be similar to what you're doing, a consultant, an advisor. There's a lot regulatory affairs. Um, but I do think we need to revise our ecosystem here domestically, not just the supply chain. That was clearly a mistake that we made with globalization, but educating, like back to the STEM at the
Yeah.
universities. There's been a movement away from that over the last 30 years, and we're paying for that right now.
Yeah. No, no. In my generation, my peers, if you wanted a steady, good paying job, you went into STEM. A lot of classmates who became engineers, who became scientists, a lot became doctors, dentists, pharmacists. Okay. And now everybody's kids, they want to be in finance,
Yeah, yeah, and the playing with meme stocks and trading. It's a different.
cryptocurrency.
it,
Look how much money Sam Bankman-Fried made.
it,
I'm being facetious here.
no, I know, but that's serious. Like that's those are like the new role models, unfortunately, and I think in India and in China where they're more developing, like they're like 30 years behind where we used to be. They have different types of role models.
Yes.
Yeah,
No,
it's a problem.
my Indian and my Chinese students, they actually think I had a good career.
Yeah,
They want to do what I do.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Uh, so maybe sticking to the career for a second, you do a lot of consultancy now, especially biopharmaceutical companies. What kind of work do you typically do? Like, what's your most commonly requested service, would you say? Or
So I'll say, although I put on my LinkedIn page, I'm a consultant. It's more an advertisement than a description of my activities. I'm very very bad at selling myself,
mhm,
and anyone who sees this podcast will probably attest to that. So you know, it basically, I get work that comes in over the transom. It's commonly um, someone who wants someone to come in and look at their big picture. So okay, I mean, I know a little bit about AI. You're not going to bring me in for AI. You're not going to bring me in for the latest organic synthesis methodology or what have you, or protein engineering. But um, uh, what's at the top level? What does my operation look like, and what can I do better?
I see. And do you think that that's satisfying work for you? Do you think that's like a destination career for someone maybe who spent a few decades? Is a few decades like maybe too much to spend in industry before you go out on your own, or do you think you can do it shorter now because of the time period that we're in? Like, what are your thoughts on career
Yeah.
advancement?
Where I teach, the administration said that every professor has to have a policy for AI. So I had to, for my course, develop a policy for AI. And the courses I teach, I like to teach courses that are case based. That is to say, I teach a drug discovery course, and the way I teach that is by looking at individual drugs. How were they discovered? Every drug was discovered in its own unique way, so I call that artificial experience. Okay, so it's artificial experience to figure out how to do the next one. And so I don't know. So you asked the question, how many years you have to work before you become a consultant? I think you need real experience, and if you can't do that, artificial experience.
Wow, that's the that's the new world we live in. Yeah, I do you see any value in being a generalist? Because one of the theories, or not theory, but something I've observed is people come in, you're a specialist
Hmm.
initially, right? You're
Hmm.
you're a coordinator, you're a research assistant, you're a startup specialist. But over a period of time, if you build your career properly, manage it well, you become a generalist. So you learn like
Hmm.
a hodgepodge of different skills, and then at some point, like you said, someone can just hire you and say, "Hey, I don't want to hire all these people. I just want to hire you, pick your brain, maybe make you an advisor on
Yeah, but
everything that
again,
you've
right,
learned."
so I need all the specialists. I'm basically just picking my brain and saying, what specialists do we need?
Right. Right.
So your typical college professor, university professor, um, works on one thing their entire life.
Mhm.
Okay, and they just become the absolute world's expert on that. Um, but in business, somebody has to be able to coordinate activities of these very disparate group of individuals and figure out how to make them work together and work efficiently. And that's one of the things I've been passionate about recently, well, maybe a good 10 years, is leadership, issues of leadership. And it's not easy. All fields, everybody, science, politics, we need leaders. And how do you encourage people or train people to become a leader? And how do you know when you're hiring who's going to be a leader and who's not going to be a leader?
Yeah.
Big problem.
That's the tough part for me too, even running a small business is I actually told my employees last week I'm trying to build leaders here so that you guys can replace me so I can do
Mhm.
other things. I've got a
Well,
bunch of other things.
I'll tell you that puts you in um, top echelon because so many people, the last thing they want to do is to train a subordinate to replace them because that eliminates my job security.
Right.
Oh my
Right.
God, there's somebody in my group who could replace me. That's the last thing I want.
Yeah. That's the wrong attitude to have, even if you're not the business
Absolutely.
owner, even if you're not the entrepreneur.
That's right.
Uh, do you where we stand right now with the big pharma and the long tail of biotechs that come and go or get acquired and the big pharma get bigger. Do you think the big pharma will continue to get bigger, or do you think there's a limit to this and then another set of companies will emerge?
So I analogize this to the auto industry. So when the auto industry started about 125 years ago, there were all kinds of companies. Even when I was a kid in the 1950s, Studebaker, Rambler, I can just, uh, uh, Nash, Kaiser. I mean, there were cars on the roads built by those companies. It's all consolidation. So now, and I think at some point, is there going to be further consolidation in the auto industry? I kind of think not. Okay. Is there going to be further consolidation in the farm industry? I'm going to guess we're. I mean, at some point, antitrust legislation is going to come to bear, but I think we're about as consolidated as it's going to be.
Hmm. That could be exciting then for innovation.
Yeah.
Uh, I think
So
maybe it's,
who's going to be the Tesla of the farm industry?
and they haven't come out yet, right? As far as you're aware, you haven't
What?
seen anyone potentially like CRISPR or like Beam or any of these too small, right?
So I mean, remember these are enabling technologies, not a business model. Can I
Yeah,
make a business model out of CRISPR? I don't know. Maybe you can, maybe not.
yeah. So we haven't seen it
I
yet.
mean, CRISPR's a tool, so it's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
tool.
We haven't seen it yet, which is like actually exciting um,
Hmm.
to think about. That
Yeah.
for those of us that
Well,
are,
I mean, messenger RNA therapeutics, Moderna. mm, I think the person on the street doesn't realize what incredibly difficult formulation that is. I mean, when I was working in the lab, I worked on messenger RNA. Have you ever worked on messenger RNA?
no, no,
No,
never,
it's
not even on a
horrible
study.
stuff. It's
Yeah.
extremely labile. You look at it wrong, and it degrades, and it's sticky. Sticks to everything. So you work with it. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, it's stuck to some vessel 3 steps back. So how are you going to take this stuff, which is incredibly labile and incredibly difficult to work with, and put it into a tube, inject it into a person, have that go into the bloodstream, still stable, have it go into a cell, still stable, and now make the product? I mean, from my experience working with Vector, I would have said it's impossible. Certainly, it's impossible for me to do it.
And do you think it's gonna be possible?
No, I mean it's possible. I mean,
Uh,
I take the a BioNTech vaccine. I just took a
Yeah.
booster.
Yeah.
Okay, it works.
Yeah.
I got COVID once, and it was an extremely mild case. It was 36 hours. I was feeling a little under the weather. Stuff works great. It's a miracle.
Do you
You know,
think
in
that's
Moderna, their business model was to come up with therapeutics and not vaccines because there wasn't enough money to be made in vaccines.
right?
And the only reason they got into vaccines is because of the pay issue. All of a sudden, the federal government is saying, we're willing to spend billions of dollars for a vaccine. Oh, now I have a buyer.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, it's a great technology for vaccines, but until recently, the money wasn't there.
Do you think that platform going forward is here to stay? The for
Oh, yeah.
other, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So if
Oh,
you
yeah.
had to pick like three platforms going forward, do you think these GLP-1s are around for the long haul, or
The GLP-1, you mean
the RA
for,
agonist for weight loss, A1C reduction, that stuff?
yeah. So, oh, boy. You know, uh, um, obesity therapeutics. Remember, I work for the company that Wyeth that made fen.
Yeah, yeah, I
Okay,
remember that.
I mean, yeah, okay. I think that was a 15 billion in litigation costs, maybe
Yeah,
more than that.
yeah,
Even for a company as big as Wyeth, that's serious money. Um, so and why these drugs work to lower weight that were designed for type 2 diabetes. Uh, it's not my specialty, but I don't know. Maybe you know. How is it that they can't? I mean, I think it's just serendipity.
mhm,
The clinical observations. It's like sildenafil, like Viagra. Nobody
yeah,
was going out to come up with a drug for erectile dysfunction. But then there was a clinical observation. I think these drugs that cause weight loss, it was a clinical observation.
yeah,
So, oh, wow, they weren't supposed to make people lose weight, but they do. Okay, great. Business opportunity.
yeah. Huge business opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think it's enough to fund? Like, do you think mRNA, let's say mRNA, what are the biggest things right now?
So,
mRNA,
so
CAR,
remember that that's a tool.
yeah, it's a
So
tool.
then,
Yeah,
but I think that's a tool that can be applied to the treatment of lots of diseases above and beyond vaccines.
right, right. I'm trying to think of things that will keep the industry busy and booming for decades to come. So let's say mRNA platform, let's say CRISPR, let's say these GLP-1s. Is there
Mhm.
anything else I'm missing that's significant right now? Maybe.
Yeah. So all the things that haven't been discovered yet.
But something that has like these things, but it
Yeah.
haven't
I know.
been
I mean, I
explored
think
enough.
it's just so hard to predict.
Yeah,
That I mean, I guess I have faith in science, and some smart man or some smart woman is going to come up with something great. And all these diseases when I was a kid that were untreatable, or certainly when my parents were kids that were untreatable. Now it's just routine.
right, right. We take it
So
for
I
granted.
think we're not going to run out of work until we run out of diseases.
Wow, that's that's a good quote for the podcast. Maybe that's the title of the video. Get a lot of more people inspired. I think this subset of healthcare, clinical research, we throw in drug discovery in that same camp. Maybe it's drug discovery slash clinical research. It's the same thing, right? Uh,
Well, two sides of the same
two
coin. Yeah.
sides of the same coin. I think it's so overlooked by traditional, like it's overshadowed by traditional healthcare that because we're taught like, hey, those are the safe jobs. Go be a medical assistant. Go be a nurse.
Hmm.
But I have so many MAs and nurses that want to do research because they watch a video and they say, hey, this is a little better. It's not
Hmm.
all the time bedside, but there's enough bedside to where I can get my fill for the patient interaction, but then it's not like just nonstop bedside care. It's I'm involved in the process. So maybe this is something that we can help spread awareness around because
Yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
it
I think
trickles down.
R and D isn't for everybody.
Hmm.
Um, it's so uh, the book I just published a couple of weeks ago just came out, Innovators. So really, the theme of the book is frustration. Okay, so people. Um, okay, so I had a 35-year career. How many drugs have I had in clinical trials? You guess.
I've read this in the book that you haven't had any successes, a
Yeah.
successful clinical trial.
So I had one clinical trials that for due to a merger acquisition was stopped at phase two because it didn't look like it was going to be good for the future portfolio of the combined company. So I had a good phase two, but then they didn't invest in phase three. And I have one now that's has approved IND that we're trying to get funding for phase one. Um,
Wow.
that that's it for 35 years. You know, how do you keep going? When your successes are on a glacial scale.
Well, seems like it's iterative and you enjoy the process and
You have to enjoy this
yeah.
process. You have to be um, a positive thinker and say, okay, it's going. I mean, it's worth 20 years of my time to do this because it's important. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, I could probably
Hey,
have
take a look at innovators. Some of the this new book, some of the very most famous names in science had um, awful, frustrating lives. Just real quick, Gregor Mendel. You talk about Mendelian genetics. Okay, so he became so discouraged they stopped doing science altogether. He became an administrator. He died. He thought he had accomplished nothing. All of the scientists of his era thought what he'd done was worthless. And 30 years after his death, it was rediscovered that now science had moved on and they realized that what he had done was very important. And we call it Mendelian genetics. He never knew.
hmm.
He never knew that he was the only person in modern times to have founded a new scientific discipline.
That's the new book that I'm gonna buy. And I'm gonna put the link underneath as well. Innovators, 16 visionary scientists and their struggle for recognition from Galileo to Barbara McClintock and Rachel Carlson. Wow. I see it here. That's
I mean, poor Galileo. He discovered that the sun was the center of the universe, and what did he get for it? He was under house arrest for the last 15 years of his life.
yeah, wasn't he excommunicated from the church too? Or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
He was excommunicated. He was put under house arrest. Oh, we had all kinds of problems.
So
Terrible guy. Discovered the sun was the center of the solar system.
they had regulatory capture back then too, except it was the church. The church. Do you think regula maybe we end it on this note and feel free to just share your thoughts with me. Something recently I discovered. I've only been doing this since 2005. So, and I've been head in the dirt for the first decade, so I didn't really pay attention outside. Regulatory capture, it's something that seems unavoidable in large industries, especially highly regulated one like, by the way, we're the most regulated industry there is.
So
It's
tell me what you mean by regulatory
yeah,
capture. So
it's so it's the revolving door between regulators and industry. And having incentives and I guess conflicts of interest possibly to treat organizations differently based on what they can get later from it potentially or what's like implied that is the career trajectory for either a regulator or a industry exec that goes to regulator or vice versa. Like that's why they call it revolving door.
okay.
It's something that we can't prove it exists, right? I mean, and it's not even illegal, but it's one of those things where it just doesn't smell right. You know what I mean? I don't know how to articulate it better, but
Well, it's like all of our politicians end up later in their lives becoming lobbyists.
Exactly, or being on the board of Boeing and then they want to start a war, something like
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know.
that. I don't either, but it's something that's there. We can't say it's not there.
Yeah, no, I mean, so you want somebody in an ideal world to have experience, expertise, and um, not uh, make it for their own self-aggrandizement, and not want to exploit that for their personal benefit.
And not be a public servant.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's kinda tough because we
I
kinda
mean,
want those industry knowledge
yeah,
to be public servants at some point
right.
or yeah, yeah,
So,
just it's an imperfection that, exists and is definitely being manipulated, I don't know how bad it actually is, but there's schools of thought that it's terrible.
so I don't know. Mark Twain once said, he said, my congressman is an idiot. Ah, but I repeat myself.
Sometimes that's the best way to answer these things. I do think just bringing these topics out for discussion is healthy. Um, and I think we kind of, hopefully, we're exiting this era of it's not okay to talk about this. And I think maybe podcasts are opening that up. So I appreciate you coming on. We're gonna have to do it again once I read your new book. We'll do a part two for innovators because that's next on my reading list. I'm really glad I discovered you, and it was because of Twitter that I discovered you, and about how I'm really enjoying Drug Hunters. Like I on a 3 hour flight, I got through half of it, and I just didn't put it. I didn't want the flight to land. Can you believe that? I didn't. I didn't want the flight to land
Well,
because I was not done.
very flattering. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kirsch. Everyone, go connect with him right now. Drug Hunters is underneath. So, underneath this video and in the podcast, you'll have a link to his LinkedIn, and then you'll have link to both of the books, which I highly recommend. And we could easily do another 3 hours, but I know we both gotta go. We'll set it up for a part two.
Thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast.
Thank you for coming on, Dr. Kirsch. It was an honor, and talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you so much for your flattering comments. Thank you.